We're heading somewhere truly steeped in mystery, layer upon layer over millennia. Ancient Egypt.
Yeah, it's a place we think we know, but just scratch the surface and the riddles start piling up.
Exactly. And that's our focus today, these unexplained enigmas from ancient Egypt that, well, they still puzzle us. We're talking curses, lost cities.
Mind-bending engineering, maybe even lost knowledge, all of it.
We've pulled together a whole stack of sources for this deep dive: articles, research, notes, looking into some of the most persistent questions.
Our plan is to sort of unpack these sources with you, find the really fascinating bits, and see what they suggest about the ancient Egyptians and the puzzles they left us.
Right. This is for you, getting you that knowledge quickly, but, properly.
And we'll look at all sides presented in the sources. You've got the solid archaeology, the established history.
And then some of the more, let's say, alternative theories too. Sometimes pretty controversial ones.
Definitely. Okay, where do we start?
Let's dive in. Maybe with a couple of stories that almost feel like myths. One surprisingly recent, the other a genuine find.
A mix of legend and actual discovery. Good start.
Okay, first up, a tale connecting the ancient world to a pretty modern tragedy, the supposed mummy's curse and the Titanic.
Right, that legend. It somehow got attached to the RMS Titanic's disastrous maiden voyage in 1912.
Yeah. So the sources, they describe how back in the late 19th century, archaeologists found this mummy, British archaeologists.
Supposedly a powerful priestess from way back, like 1500 BCE.
And the story goes, her sarcophagus had these explicit warnings, don't disturb her, that kind of thing.
Which naturally were ignored, according to the legend. And the mummy gets shipped off to England.
And that's when things supposedly started going wrong for people involved.
Yeah.
Illness, deaths.
Even just creepy feelings around the sarcophagus itself. Those kinds of reports.
So eventually the story claims this mummy gets sold to an American collector. And somehow it's secretly loaded onto the Titanic. Not on the official records, though.
Which is where historians, strongly push back. There's zero proof, nothing on the manifest.
But the legend hangs on, doesn't it? You hear these survivor accounts mentioning an unnatural presence or seeing figures.
It's just classic folklore meets disaster, really.
So what's the takeaway here? Is it just a spooky story?
Well, it's less about whether it's true. It's almost certainly not, and more about why we tell stories like this. It shows how we try to find, deeper meanings or supernatural explanations for awful events. That idea of an ancient curse reaching into our time is powerful.
It's like we want that connection, that ancient mystery spilling into our world.
Exactly. It's a human thing, weaving these narratives, connecting dramatic events, even across centuries.
Okay, so from a legend with shaky proof to a very real lost city that was found, this one feels more like, real-life archaeology drama.
Heracleion, sometimes called Egypt's Atlantis, though maybe less mythical.
Right. For ages, people weren't sure if it was real, just known from old texts. Then in 2000, this underwater archaeologist, Frank Gaudio,
he makes this incredible find about 6 kilometers off the coast.
And it wasn't just a few rocks, was it?
No, not at all. A major city. Founded way back, 8th century BCE. It was Egypt's main port, the big gateway for trade with Greece.
But what they found underwater was just, wow. Temples, huge statues, coins, ships.
All incredibly preserved down there. A whole metropolis basically frozen underwater.
So what happened? How did it end up underwater?
Well, the evidence points towards nature. Things like submerged inscriptions talking about floods, tremors, combined with geology suggest the main culprit was probably soil liquefaction. Around 365 AD, maybe, triggered by earthquakes.
Soil liquefaction, like quicksand.
Pretty much. The ground under the city basically failed, causing everything to collapse and sink over time.
So not one sudden cataclysm, but maybe a series of events.
That seems likely, based on what they've found. Finding Heracleion was huge, though. It proved those ancient texts weren't just stories. And it's a stark reminder, isn't it? How even major cities can just vanish under the forces of nature. Still relevant today.
That feeling of finding something real that was thought to be myth must be incredible. It makes you wonder what else is down there.
Absolutely. It really shows what modern tech like underwater archaeology can do. We can literally rediscover lost parts of history.
Okay, let's shift from things lost underwater to things standing right in front of us, but still full of questions. The pyramids, the Sphinx.
Yeah, when you stand in front of the Great Pyramid, the scale is just hard to process.
It really is. The size, the precision.
Yeah.
Some blocks weighing 50 tons, how alignment with stars.
It feels almost impossible for that era based on what we thought they could do, which is why you get theories about,
Ancient astronauts, outside help.
Exactly. Those ideas pop up because the scale is just so baffling. But our sources also highlight newer evidence that points back to human ingenuity, like the Diary of Muir.
Oh, the papyrus diary. I read about that.
Yeah.
Found near the Red Sea.
That's the one. An overseer writing about transporting limestone blocks for the Great Pyramid. During Khufu's time,
What did it say?
daily logistics, workers, boats, using canals off the Nile to bring the stones closer. It's very practical.
So actual proof of human organization, massive labor.
Precisely. Now, we still don't know the exact method for lifting the heaviest stones or getting that perfect alignment. Sure, mysteries remain. But finds like Muir's diary give concrete evidence of incredible human planning and, well, sheer manpower. The takeaway is, while we're still figuring out some hows, new finds keep showing us just how capable these ancient engineers and workers were.
It's always that balance, isn't it, between awe at what seems impossible and the evidence we find.
Absolutely. Archaeology keeps refining the picture.
Speaking of things that challenge the standard picture, the Sphinx. We all know it, but its age. Apparently that's a hot debate.
Yeah, the standard view is Khafre built it around 2500 BCE, but geologist Robert Schoch came along in the 90s with a different idea.
He looked at the erosion patterns, right, on the enclosure walls.
Exactly. And he argued they showed clear signs of water erosion, like heavy rainfall, not just the wind and sand you see today.
Which would mean what?
That kind of weathering suggests a much wetter climate. So Schoch proposed the Sphinx had to be much older, maybe built around 7000 BCE or even earlier.
Whoa. That completely rewrites early Egyptian history.
It certainly would. And the sources mention some other studies using things like ultrasound that sort of tentatively support an older age based on erosion.
But the mainstream Egyptologists aren't convinced?
Generally, no. They remain cautious.
Why? What's the pushback?
Mostly, it's the lack of other evidence from that specific period at Giza. Where are the tools, the settlements, the artifacts from a civilization capable of carving the Sphinx back in, say, 7000 BCE?
Okay. You need more than one type of evidence.
Exactly. Historical timelines usually need several lines of evidence pointing the same way before a major revision happens, so it's about reconciling the geology with the archaeology.
It's just fascinating that such a famous monument still has these fundamental debates swirling around it, different sciences seeing different things.
It really highlights how geological data can challenge historical dates and the need for, different fields to work together and maybe how much we don't know about that really deep past.
Keeps us asking questions for sure.
Definitely.
Okay, while we're on carvings, let's talk about some specific ones that really spark debate. The Abydos stuff, the Dendera lights.
Yes. The Temple of Seti at Abydos. There are these hieroglyphs. Well, they look uncannily like modern machines.
Like a helicopter, a submarine, maybe a flying saucer.
Yeah, visually, the resemblance is striking. It's hard not to see it. And that's where, ancient alien theories often get a boost. People suggest they're depicting tech they actually saw.
Well, what's the standard explanation?
The mainstream archaeological view points to how hieroglyphs were sometimes carved over. They argue it's basically pareidolia, seeing patterns that aren't really there.
How?
Imagine carving new hieroglyphs over older ones, maybe filling the old ones with plaster. If that plaster falls out over time, you get bits of the old symbols showing through underneath the new ones. Combine those fragments, and accidentally, you get shapes that look like a helicopter.
Okay, so an accidental visual effect from layering and decay makes sense. But then what about Dendera? Those images that look like giant light bulbs?
At the Temple of Hathor, yeah. Those are equally strange. Sometimes they show a snake inside, like a filament.
Super weird. What's the theory there?
Well, again, the ancient tech proponents suggest maybe some form of electrical device. The sources even mention some engineering tests claiming a model built like the depiction could potentially work with electricity, though how isn't clear.
Again, hinting at lost knowledge, maybe.
Possibly.
Yeah.
But predictably, mainstream Egyptology interprets them symbolically. They're seen as metaphors from Egyptian mythology, maybe creation, divine energy, light, but not literal machines.
So the challenge is not projecting our modern ideas onto ancient symbols.
Exactly. That's the core issue with both Abydos and Dendera. These images look modern to us, but were they meant literally? Or are they complex symbols from a totally different worldview? The takeaway is that debate between literal depiction versus deep metaphor.
It really shows the gap between our world and theirs, doesn't it?
A prime example of that interpretive challenge.
Which leads to another practical puzzle. How did they light the insides of these tombs and temples to do all that intricate carving in the pitch black?
Good question, without leaving soot marks everywhere.
Right. Torches or simple oil lamps would leave soot, especially in sealed tombs, but many walls are surprisingly clean.
So people have proposed alternatives. One idea is highly polished copper mirrors.
Reflecting sunlight.
Yeah, angling sunlight down shafts deep into the structures would require incredible precision, though.
What else? Any more out there ideas?
Oh, yeah. Some sources mention more speculative concepts like a central light tower somehow beaming light, or maybe even harnessing natural geomagnetic energy somehow.
And those Dendera bulbs obviously feed into that speculation, right? Maybe they did have some kind of ancient electricity.
It definitely fuels that line of thought. And then you get the really elaborate theories like the pyramids themselves being giant power plants.
Using energy from the earth. Telluric currents.
That kind of idea. Fascinating, but definitely on the fringe. Modern science is pretty skeptical. There's no clear evidence or known mechanism for how that would work within physics or ancient tech.
So the takeaway here is a simple problem like light leads to all sorts of answers, from clever engineering to, well, pyramid power plants.
Pretty much. It shows how we try to fill knowledge gaps. Did they have incredibly clever low-tech solutions like mirrors? Or did they have something more advanced we've lost? It forces us to explore that line between known ingenuity and speculative lost tech.
Keeps you wondering about their true capability.
Nice.
Okay, let's move on to things hidden, lost, or vanished. Stuff buried under the sand or just gone from the history books.
Right, the things archaeology is still hunting for.
Like the Lost Labyrinth. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote about this massive place near Lake Moeris. He said it had, 3,000 chambers?
Yeah, above and below ground. An endless maze, he called it, claiming it was even more impressive than the pyramids.
But for centuries, it was just a story, right?
Yeah.
Maybe exaggerated, maybe lost.
Until 2008, a team used ground-penetrating radar, GPR.
The stuff that sees underground.
Exactly. Near the Hawara Pyramid Complex, where Herodotus said it was, and they found something.
Something big.
Something huge. The radar showed this enormous, complex grid structure underground, corridors, chambers, stretching over a large area. It matched Herodotus' description remarkably well.
Wow. So what's the theory? What is it?
Well, finding it sparked ideas that maybe this structure is incredibly old, possibly even predating the pyramids, built by some lost civilization with advanced knowledge.
But we can't see it. It's still buried.
Mostly, yeah. It's inaccessible, and the sources mention that further large-scale excavation has been limited since that initial survey.
Why? If it could be older and bigger than the pyramids, why not dig it up?
That's kind of the mystery now, isn't it? Probably complex reasons, funding, permissions, the sheer scale of the work, but the discovery itself. Huge takeaway.
Yeah.
It shows how ancient accounts like Herodotus's, sometimes dismissed as fantasy, can be validated by modern tech. Some legends are just history waiting to be found.
Okay, from a hidden structure to a completely vanished army, Cambyses' lost army. Another historical head-scratcher.
Right, this goes back to 524 BCE. The Persian king Cambyses II sends this huge army, supposedly 50,000 soldiers.
50,000.
That's the number Herodotus gives. Sent from Thebes into the western desert towards the Siwa oasis to attack the oracle of Amun there.
And they just vanished, never arrived.
Marched into the desert and were never seen again. Herodotus claimed they got caught in a massive sandstorm and were completely buried.
Have people looked for them?
Oh yeah, lots of searches. Satellite imaging, ground surveys along the likely route. They've found bits and pieces, maybe some metal artifacts, remnants, but nothing conclusive. No mass grave of 50,000 soldiers.
How does an army that big just disappear without a trace?
It really speaks to the power of the desert, doesn't it? How vast and unforgiving it is. Even a huge group can be swallowed up, making finding evidence thousands of years later incredibly hard.
Are there other theories besides the sandstorm?
The sources mention possibilities like ambush, maybe they ran out of water and supplies, or even, as some ancient writers hinted, divine punishment for threatening the sacred oracle.
So a known historical event, but the ending is a total blank.
Exactly. The takeaway is the enduring mystery of disappearances like this, the challenge of finding evidence in those landscapes, and how that lack of evidence just fuels speculation.
Leaves a big question mark in the history books.
A very big one.
Moving way back to the very start of Egyptian history. Even the first king is a bit of a mystery, isn't he? Who was the first pharaoh?
Well, the traditional king lists and ancient writings point to a figure named Menes. He's credited with unifying Upper and Lower Egypt around 3100 BCE, kicking off the first dynasty.
Okay, so Menes. Case closed.
Not so fast. Historians debate whether Menes was a real single person, or if the name is more symbolic, maybe representing several rulers involved in unification, or just the concept itself.
And the sources suggest actual candidates.
Two main ones, Narmer and Horoha. There's the famous Narmer palette.
Oh yeah, the makeup palette thing.
Sort of, yeah. It clearly shows King Narmer wearing the crowns of both Upper and Lower Egypt. Strong evidence for his role in unification.
But then there's Horoha.
Right. Archaeological finds, especially at Abydos, where early kings were buried, suggest Horoha might have been the one who really solidified the dynasty and set up the administration.
So we don't know for sure if Menes was Narmer, or Horoha, or both, or just an idea.
Pretty much. It's unresolved. Was it one man, a composite figure, a title? The takeaway is how tricky it is piecing together that very early history where myth, individuals, and collective memory all get tangled up in the records that survive.
The very foundation is a bit hazy.
Which reminds us how much interpretation goes into understanding records from that deep in the past.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit. Explore some mysteries tied to their culture, beliefs, maybe even their practical know-how. Things that show sophistication in ways we might not expect.
Like the Temple of Hathor at Dendera again. Beyond just religion, it seems like it was designed with sound in mind. Acoustics.
How so?
The sources describe how the architecture itself, the stone, the chamber, seems built to amplify sound with this really specific, almost eerie precision. Instruments they used in rituals like the sistrum.
The rattle thing.
Yeah, they weren't just making noise, they were part of creating this specific sound environment, supposedly to help connect worshipers to the divine.
And this leads to theories about, what? Lost science.
Some researchers think the temple might have been designed to generate infrasound sound below human hearing. There's some suggestion infrasound can induce altered states, maybe spiritual feelings.
Wow.
Others just see it as evidence of a really advanced, perhaps lost understanding of architectural acoustics, how to build spaces that resonate in particular ways.
So the temple itself was like an instrument, part of the ritual.
That's the fascinating idea. It really highlights how their sacred spaces might have been these complex sensory environments, using sound in ways we're maybe just starting to understand. The takeaway is this potential link between architecture, ritual, sound, and even psychology.
Okay, looking at ancient writings now. Texts like the Ipuwer Papyrus from around 1600 BCE. It describes this time of total chaos.
Yeah, really grim stuff. The Nile turning to blood, famine, rebellions, social breakdown.
It sounds weirdly like the biblical plagues, doesn't it?
The parallels are striking, which has led to debate. Is it a record of an actual historical period of collapse? Is it a more general warning about what happens when order breaks down, or is it something else?
Like prophecy.
That comes up too, especially with texts like the Prophecy of Nefertiti, which seems to predict Egypt's decline in foreign rule before it happened.
So, did they see the future? Or were they just really good at reading the signs?
That's the core question. Were they just incredibly astute observers of cycles? Natural disasters happen, political situations shift. Maybe they used astronomy to track long-term patterns.
Or were they just projecting current fears onto the future?
That's the scholarly debate. Cyclical knowledge versus political extrapolation versus actual prophecy. The takeaway is how these texts give us a glimpse into their anxieties about chaos and order and their whole perspective on time, fate, and history.
Let's get tangible again. Mummies. Specifically one called Bashiri, found by Howard Carter before Tutankhamun.
Yes. Bashiri's mummy is interesting because of the unique wrapping technique. Layered linen, creating a sort of pyramid shape around the body.
And when he studied it later with CT scans,
they found really precise embalming. The heart was left in place, which wasn't always standard, and they used these specific complex resins. But the really surprising part was the ingredients in those resins.
what about them?
Analysis showed stuff sourced from incredibly far away, including ingredients that seem to have originated as far afield as Southeast Asia.
Wait, Southeast Asia, in ancient Egypt, for embalming.
That's what the analysis suggests. It points towards these potentially vast, long-distance trade networks operating way back then, maybe more extensive than we usually think.
So mummification wasn't just preservation, it was high-tech chemistry using global resources.
Exactly. It was a sophisticated art and science relying on a complex supply chain. The takeaway is how forensic science on remains can totally change our picture of ancient techniques and just how connected the ancient world might have been.
Building on those ingredients, Egyptian medicine, and this idea of alchemical origins.
Well, the embalming recipes themselves show a knowledge of chemistry, right? Complex mixtures with antiseptic properties, preservatives, perfumes. It's this blend of practical chemical know-how and ritual purpose that sort of hints at early alchemy.
And then there's that really controversial finding. Nicotine and cocaine on a mummy?
Yes, that one is highly debated. If the finding is accurate and not some kind of modern contamination.
Which is hard to rule out sometimes.
True, but if it's real, it's baffling. Nicotine from tobacco, cocaine from coca plants, both are native to the Americas.
So finding traces on an ancient Egyptian mummy suggests
Wild theories about pre-Columbian contact across the Atlantic, thousands of years before Columbus. Highly speculative, but provocative.
Did they sail to the Americas? Or did plants travel some other way?
We just don't know. And alongside this, we have Egyptian medical texts, the papyri, showing sophisticated knowledge for the time surgery, herbal remedies. They describe tools, but it was always mixed with magic and religion.
So their medicine was advanced, but also ritualistic?
Yeah, a blend. The takeaway is the surprising sophistication, the hint of alchemy, and this one truly anomalous finding the New World alkaloids that, while contested, forces us to at least consider possibilities about ancient global connections we'd normally dismiss.
Opens up some big questions about the ancient world map.
It certainly does.
Okay, we can't talk ancient Egyptian mysteries without mentioning the most famous one, King Tut's curse.
Ah, yes. The story that took off after Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon opened Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922.
And then people connected to the dig started dying. Right. Lord Carnarvon being the most famous example, died shortly after.
Right. Now, the scientific explanation usually involves things like exposure to harmful mold spores, bacteria, maybe toxins sealed in the tomb for over 3,000 years. Plausible biological causes.
But the curse story is just so much more dramatic. And it's stuck.
It really did, fueled by genuinely eerie coincidences reported at the time, like a citywide power outage in Cairo, supposedly happening at the exact moment Carnarvon died, stories about his dog howling back in England.
Spooky stuff.
Exactly. These things feed the narrative. So the takeaway isn't really about if the curse was real, it's about why the story is so powerful and persistent.
What does it tell us?
It's a great case study in how we perceive coincidence, our attraction to dramatic supernatural explanations over mundane ones, and just the sheer narrative power that surrounds these ancient sacred sites. The story itself became a phenomenon.
We prefer the spooky explanation sometimes.
Often seems that way.
Okay, final one. Not all mysteries are ancient, right? There are places in Egypt today with their own strange vibes, like Bab Zuwaylah in Cairo, the Gate of Ghosts.
Yeah, that's a much later structure from the Fatimid era, but it has a dark history. It was used for public executions for a long time.
And the sources mention one particularly gruesome incident after the Ottomans took over. Something about Mamluk heads.
Grim stuff. Reportedly, 800 Mamluk heads were displayed on the gate. That kind of historical trauma, it can leave an echo.
So people today report ghosts, weird feelings.
Ghost sightings, strange noises, just an oppressive, heavy feeling around the gate. That's the lore.
And the explanations.
Yeah.
Besides ghosts.
Well, some look at potential physical causes, like maybe infrasound generated by the gate structure or wind patterns, which can make people feel uneasy or even hallucinate. Others talk about collective memory, how historical trauma can kind of imprint on a place psychologically.
So history isn't just in ruins, it's in living places too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a reminder that Egypt's mysteries aren't all buried under sand. Some are tied to more recent history, events whose impact is still felt, or at least perceived today. The takeaway is how we interpret unusual experiences in places with dark pasts. Is it supernatural, psychological, physical?
Wow. Okay, we've covered a lot. Sunken cities, vanished armies, carvings that look like helicopters, potential lost tech, weird science, curses, ghosts.
It's quite a journey through Egypt's enigmas, and even after centuries of study, so much remains. Well, mysterious. We've seen this constant back and forth, haven't we?
Between what?
Between the solid archaeology, the scientific explanations, and then these persistent anomalies, these things that just don't quite fit, plus the powerful myths and stories that endure.
Yeah, exploring all this doesn't just teach us about the past. It really makes you question assumptions about what ancient people were capable of and how we even interpret evidence now.
And that brings us to maybe one final question, a big one, tied to the most iconic structure of all,
The Great Pyramid.
Exactly. Unlike Tutankhamun's tomb, which was packed with treasure, Khufu's pyramid, found basically empty, no riches, no mummy.
Right. The usual explanation is just looting, right? Robbed thousands of years ago.
That's the standard logical assumption. But the sources also raise those other ideas. What about hidden chambers, like that big void they found using scans in 2017? Could something still be hidden inside?
Or maybe the treasure wasn't gold.
Exactly. That's the more profound thought. What if the real treasure of the Great Pyramid isn't material wealth at all?
But knowledge, sealed within the design somehow.
What if the greatest legacy they left wasn't gold, but the knowledge embedded in how they built it? The scale, the alignment, the sheer organization required. Knowledge we maybe still don't fully grasp.
So here's a final thought for you to consider. What if Egypt's greatest treasures aren't artifacts in a museum, but the knowledge they had? Or maybe even just the fundamental questions their monuments and mysteries still force us to ask. What truths about the past or even about us now are still waiting to be found, or just seen in a new light?
Something to ponder.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the unexplained mysteries of ancient Egypt.